acquisition of content. To be learned in a particular subject matter is to have acquired that subject matter and to be able to replicate it. But while the intention to cultivate learners also requires a focus on content, acquisition of that content is not of primary importance. Rather, interaction with that content is. How the student interacts with the content, rather than that she or he is successful in acquiring it, is what must drive the methods and expectations for outcomes if the end of an education is to cultivate learners. To put it in economic terms, the business of educating the learned might be very different from the business of educating learners. Montaigne's 400-year-old gastronomical observations in his essay of pedantry suggest an apt metaphor for fleshing out the distinction I have just sketched. He calls our attention to the meaning of an education of substance, one which transcends mere ornament or show so as to be truly transformative. He suggests this metaphor of substance in a variety of ways, beginning with a critique of those who purvey an education aimed only at learnedness. You see, our problems are not new. These sorts of teacher, Montaigne tells us, fail to nourish the very students for whom the education might be transformative, by encouraging them to consider knowledge as something merely ornamental, so many fine words at the ends of their lips, or in our own day, regurgitated on tests. In so doing, those professors fail to help students to internalize what they have learned, making it their own. Yet this internalization is precisely what is required for an education of substance, for an education that is transformative. Montaigne accuses these purveyors of learnedness of being to leave their students starving, even as they themselves are left starving. He writes, quote, "Just as birds sometimes go in quest of grain and carry it in their beaks without tasting it to give a beakful to their little ones, so our pedants go pillaging knowledge in books and lodge it only on the end of their lips in order merely to disgorge it and scatter it to the wind. But what is worse, their students and their little ones are not nourished and fed with their learning either. It passes from hand to hand with the sole purpose of making a show of it, talking to others and telling stories about it." That's the end of the quote. Now, obviously, the starvation alluded to by Montaigne does not result from having nothing to eat. We have no reason to doubt that the grain in the beaks of the birds is nourishing enough, and so we have no reason to doubt that the knowledge in books is nourishing enough. But insofar as it is neither eaten by the bird nor taken in by its young, the grains of knowledge succeed in nourishing no one. They therefore fail in providing substance and succeed in transforming no one. Rather, they are merely retained intact, now scattered to the winds, now passed from hand to hand, now talked and told about. Teachers and students alike succeed at being more learned, as witnessed by what proceeds from their lips in the form of fine words, but they starve in the process. What would make for the opposite of starvation, especially when the grains of knowledge are so plentifully available as they are in this country in the way of public education and private? Presumably, it would be a scenario under which learning would be nourishing for students, transforming them beyond mere learnedness through a process of digestion. Montaigne writes, "We know how to say, Cicero says thus, such are the morals of Plato. These are the very words of Aristotle." Maybe we don't know how to say that anymore, but Montaigne thought we did. But, Montaigne says, "What do we say ourselves? What do we judge? What do we do? A parrot could well say as much." And earlier when I was reading over it, I kept saying parent. Because I have a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old. It was a Freudian slip every time I read it. So if I say parent, please hear parrot from now on. Yeah, yes, that's right. Learning from books and the knowledge they offer does not seem to be the problem for Montaigne. But the teacher must find a way to help the student to move beyond parroting. Moving beyond parroting would entail not just knowing what others have said, not just having a memory full, like a beak stuffed with grain, but rather having something to say for oneself based on the process of digestion. But digestion isn't possible if the student doesn't swallow. And swallowing isn't even enough. for swallowing can result in no more than regurgitation. As Montaigne puts it, we take the opinions and knowledge of others into our keeping, and that is all. We must make them our own. What good does it do to us to have a belly full if it is not digested, if it is not transformed into us, if it does not make us bigger and stronger? I propose that this sort of transformation, the kind that makes us bigger and stronger, and that comes from an education that changes the very substance of one's being, is precisely what is possible when the end of education is to cultivate